He slept beside the dumpster until he heard a cry. At 3:17 a.m., beneath the flickering streetlight of an alley, no one walks twice. A homeless veteran named Raymond stirred from a restless sleep. The cardboard beneath him was damp. The December wind gnawed through every layer of his threadbare coat. But it wasn't the cold that woke him. It was a sound thin, desperate, a cry. He thought maybe it was the wind or the remnants of dreams from a life that used to be his, until he heard it again, sharper, closer, a baby. Raymond scrambled up, heart pounding, breath catching in his chest. And there, next to a trash bin, was a bundle. A baby girl, wrapped in a coat too thin for the night, too small to be a home. And beside her, standing guard, was a German shepherd, with eyes that didn't blink. That night, Raymond didn't just find a child. He found a reason to live. And that dog-scarred, silent, forgotten would rewrite all their fates. Los Angeles glittered from afar, its skyline a beacon of promise, where neon dreams flickered behind high-rise windows and palm trees swayed above polished streets. But beyond the boulevards and billboards, away from the echo of fame and fast cars, there were places the light never touched. Forgotten corners, alleyways that didn't make it onto postcards. Down one such narrow passage off Skid Row, the city's indifference settled like frost. Dumpsters fumed in the cold, belching stale rot into the air. Rats skittered along shadowy walls, their claws scratching over damp concrete. A flickering street lamp overhead buzzed like a broken memory, half alive, half gone. Everything about this stretch of the city whispered, "No one looks here, no one cares." The night was bitter. The kind of cold that crept under coats, bit through denim, and settled deep in the marrow. The kind of cold that stole breath from lungs and hope from the heart. And in that cold, beneath the rust-stained wall of an abandoned building, lay a bundle so small it might have been overlooked entirely had it not moved. A child. A newborn. She was wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket that had once been soft, once perhaps pink, now gray with grime and soaked through with melting frost. Her skin was pale, too pale, and her lips had begun to turn that unmistakable shade of blue that only the night and neglect could carve into innocence. Her tiny chest rose and fell in fragile waves, each breath shallower than the last. Fingers, no bigger than curled flower petals, twitched beneath the blanket before falling still again. The street was quiet. No cars, no voices. Only the occasional far-off siren slicing through the silence like a warning long overdue. No one saw her. No one heard. And if no one came soon, the cold would finish what abandonment had started. A gust of wind howled through the alley, lifting a piece of newspaper into the air like a ghost. It fluttered and spun before falling beside the bundle. The baby didn't flinch. Not far away, a cat leapt from a trash bin and disappeared into a drainage pipe. Even the vermin were seeking warmth. And yet, the child lay there, alone, unwanted, unnoticed by the city that never truly slept. But something was stirring in the shadows. A presence, a silhouette that did not belong to the night, but had become part of it nonetheless. From the far end of the alley, barely visible against the grime and snow, a dog emerged. The first thing that moved through the snow wasn't the wind. It was a shadow, thin, slow, deliberate, a creature not quite invisible, but forgotten enough to pass unnoticed. Its frame was once strong made for pursuit, for battle, for loyalty. Now it moved like memory, slow, cautious, half lost in the cold. The German shepherd's ribs protruded beneath a coat mottled with dirt and neglect. His gait was uneven, as though every step had to convince his body to keep going. Hunger had been gnawing at him for days, maybe weeks, but hunger had become normal. The ache wasn't what slowed him. It was the weight of something heavier, absence. His name had once been Shadow, a name spoken by a steady voice officer, Brian Kim, his handler, his partner, his world. Shadow, clear left, Shadow, heel, good boy. That voice had been his compass, his purpose. Then one night a call came over the radio, a robbery gone wrong. They entered the warehouse like they had 100 times before, backs pressed, breath steady. But this time, someone was waiting. The gunshot was fast. Brian fell faster. Shadow didn't run. He stayed, barked, bit, defended, until backup came hours later. They found him curled against his partner's chest, whimpering softly like a child lost in the woods. He was retired not long after, declared unstable under stress. No one adopted him, no ceremony, no second chance. One day, someone simply opened the back gate and let him out. And he walked. Since then, he had become part of the alleyways, a ghost on 4 legs. Tonight, like many nights before, he sniffed half-frozen scraps near a knocked-over trash bin. His legs trembled from cold. His nose flared, scanning for the faintest trace of food or threat. But the wind brought him something else, something he hadn't smelled in a long time. Not meat, not trash. Something fragile, sweet, alive. He froze, head tilted, ears twitching. It wasn't a cat or a rat. This scent was different, too small, too delicate, and faint fading. His body tensed, muscles awakening beneath bone and filth. Shadow turned, nose low to the snow. He began to follow, each paw print pressed into the white like an oath. His movement shifted, slower now, more precise, almost reverent, as though whatever he was about to find required a gentler kind of strength. The alley grew narrower, the wind harsher. Steam hissed from a nearby grate, momentarily masking the scent. He paused, lifted his head, and caught it again, stronger now, vulnerable, alone. He rounded a broken crate and stopped. There, beneath the stuttering glow of the overhead lamp, lay a shape in the snow. A bundle, motionless except for the slightest rise and fall, so slight it could have been imagination. Shadow didn't move right away. He had seen many things since the streets became his home, cruel things, discarded things. But this wasn't trash. This was life, barely holding on. He stepped closer. Steam from his breath curled into the air like smoke from a dying fire. The scent was clearer now. Milk, skin, a trace of something so new it almost didn't feel real. Shadow lowered his head. His nose brushed the edge of the tattered blanket. A tiny whimper rose into the night, barely louder than the wind. But it was enough. He flinched. His heart, buried beneath instinct and survival, lurched. The baby's skin was cold, too cold. The scent of life was slipping. Shadow backed up half a step, eyes locked onto the fragile form. His ears flicked. Something inside him stirred, a part of him that had slept since the warehouse, since Brian, since everything. He had no handler now, no commands to follow, but there was something in him that didn't need a voice to act, protect. He looked down again. The wind had picked up, lifting the edge of the blanket. The baby's cheek was exposed, blue and still. Shadow took a breath, not of fear, of decision. Then, gently, like a soldier returning to duty, he stepped forward, his body lowering, curling around the child. For a long moment, Shadow did nothing. He stood there, his body rigid, muscles thin beneath his patchy fur, staring down at the bundle that barely moved. The cold coiled around them like a snake, sinking into the concrete, into the bones, into everything. The baby made no sound now, just a soft wheeze no stronger than wind slipping through a broken window pane. Shadow's ears flicked back. He shifted his weight. There was fear in him. Not the kind bred from pain or threat. He'd long learned to live with those. This was different. Older. Deeper. The kind that comes when you know something fragile depends on you, and you don't know if you're strong enough to hold it. He lowered his head again, nose brushing the child's cheek. Cold. Still. A trembling sigh escaped from somewhere in his chest, like a ghost of a memory trying to surface. He remembered warmth once, blankets, floors that weren't concrete, a voice calling him partner, hands that fed, that praised, that trusted. But that was before. That world had turned to silence. And yet somehow that same world, the part of him that remembered how to care, was breathing again. Right here, in the snow, in the weightless chest of a child who hadn't yet been given a name. He stepped forward cautiously, as if approaching something sacred. Then, slowly, Shadow lay down. His body curled in a crescent moon around the baby, pressing close enough that his ribcage rose and fell in time with hers, or at least tried to. His fur, rough and filthy as it was, became a living barrier against the icy wind. For a moment, nothing happened. The baby remained still. The night didn't soften. But Shadow stayed. He rested his head next to her, muzzle near her tiny hand. A soft whine rose from his throat. Hesitant, questioning. Then he licked her cheek gently. Once. Twice. His tongue was coarse, but warm. The scent of her skin salt and milk and something untouched burned into his senses. The baby stirred. Barely. A shiver more than a movement. A twitch. A breath caught between leaving and returning. Shadow lifted his head. His ears twitched again. He licked her once more, slower this time. A part of him, instinctive and unthinking, remembered. Stimulation kept them breathing. It was something Brian used to say during rescues. Keep 'em awake. Keep 'em here. So he did. Not with words. With presence. He pressed his side closer to hers. His heart beat steady, louder now than it had been in years. She was still so cold, her lips so blue. His warmth wasn't enough. It wouldn't be, but he had no pause to dial a phone, no voice that humans would understand. His amber eyes scanned the alley again. Empty, still. And in that moment, between desperation and duty, something ancient awoke in him. The same fire that once made him leap through flames, run toward gunfire, drag men twice his size from wreckage. It had never truly died. Shadow stood. Snow clung to his fur as he stepped away, reluctantly. The baby let out a soft exhale, so faint it might have been nothing. He hesitated, looking back at her once, twice. Then he walked to the mouth of the alley and barked. The sound shattered the silence like glass. It wasn't a hungry bark, not angry. It was raw, sharp a call, something between a warning and a plea. It bounced off brick and metal and echoed into the hollow spaces between buildings. No response. He barked again, louder this time, more desperate. He could feel the seconds bleeding out behind him like lifeblood on concrete. Still nothing. Just the wind. Shadow let out a low, frustrated whine. He ran halfway back to the child, circled her once, pressed his nose to her chest, confirmed, barely breathing. He turned back to the alley's end and let out another cry, hoarse and broken. It wasn't just sound. It was grief. It was memory. It was command. Help her. He barked again, again, again. Then silence. The wind stilled as if even the night were holding its breath. Shadow remained standing, ears perked, body frozen, muscles taut like pulled wire, and far off in the distance, the faintest rustle. A scuff. A dragging step. Not traffic. Not a cat. Footsteps. Shadow's ears twitched. His eyes narrowed. He turned and trotted back to the child, curling around her once more, protective now, defiant. His tail wrapped along her side like a shield. If someone was coming, they would see, and if no one came, then he would stay, as long as it took, as long as he could, because something inside him had decided this child would not die alone. The alley fell silent again. Shadow stood still, breath puffing out in quick clouds. His ears strained, body alert, heart pounding beneath his scarred chest. He waited. But the night gave him nothing. No footfall, no voice, no rustle of a curtain parting in a window above. The world around him returned to its usual indifference, cold, blank, uncaring. Shadow let out a sharp bark, louder than before. The sound ricocheted off brick and steel and faded into the void. Still nothing. He let out another, and another, each bark more urgent than the last, a command, a plea, a prayer with no language. He turned in circles near the alley entrance, paws kicking up powdery snow, then bolted back to the baby, nudged her side, nosed her cheek, listened. She was still breathing, but just barely. A rattling sound escaped her lips, dry, delicate, hollow. A breath that didn't know if it should keep trying. Shadow froze. That sound. It yanked something out from deep inside him, something he thought had been buried for good. Another alley, another night, another moment where life hung in the balance. It was Officer Brian Kim, his handler, his partner, his everything. Shadow remembered the metallic scent in the air, the red blooming fast on gray concrete. Brian gasping, trying to speak but choking on blood instead. Shadow had barked then too, non-stop, until his throat burned, until the officers came. Too late, too late. They said he wasn't the same after that. They were right. Because Shadow remembered what it felt like to sit beside someone fading, powerless to stop it, to feel the warmth bleeding away beneath your paws, to realize the world just keeps turning while the person you'd give everything for is dying beside you. And now it was happening again. Only this time it wasn't a grown man in a flak vest. It was a child with a heartbeat like whispers and a face already losing its color. Shadow let out a low, desperate whimper and looked toward the mouth of the alley once more. The light from the street beyond cast a yellow blur on the snow, but no one stepped into it. The city, so loud, so full of people and cars and horns, suddenly felt like a desert. How could no one hear? How could no one come? He barked again. It cracked midair. He paced again, faster this time. Then back to the baby. He licked her face gently, as if begging her to hold on. But her breaths were no longer steady. They came in uneven pulses, shallow and spaced too far apart. Shadow let out a keening sound, something between a growl and a cry. He pressed himself tighter against her, tried to warm her again. But even he could feel it wasn't working anymore. His warmth was fading too. He tilted his head to the sky. Above them, clouds hid the stars. No moon, no glow, just a ceiling of indifference. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had been trained to track, to bite, to chase down danger and bring his partner home. But no one had trained him for this. No one had taught him how to save someone when the world didn't care. He looked down again. The baby's fingers twitched once, then went still. Shadow stood, paced in a frantic half-circle, and barked again, so loud this time it startled even him. His voice cracked. The snow drank the sound. And still, nothing. A part of him wanted to lay back down and stay until the end if it came. But another part, older, buried deep in the bones of loyalty and fight, said no. Not yet. Not again. He turned back to the alley's mouth, legs trembling, tail low, heart cracking, and he barked again, then stood absolutely still, listening, praying in the only way a dog knows how. Not far from the alley, where the cold wrapped itself around a child and a dog, beneath a collapsed wooden fence and a slanting tin awning, a sagging shape stirred beneath layers of tarp and wool. The barking had reached him, muffled at first, just noise caught in the wind. But it came again, sharper this time, closer, cutting through the usual night sounds like something with purpose. Raymond McAllister groaned. He blinked against the dark, breath rising in puffs that floated in the air before vanishing into the cold. His bones ached, like they always did when temperatures dipped below freezing. The tarp above him crackled slightly as he shifted, joints stiff, fingers barely able to curl beneath his threadbare gloves. Another bark, louder, urgent. Raymond cursed under his breath. It was probably some stray mangy mutt fighting over garbage again, or worse, a coyote. He'd seen them come down from the hills lately, starving and wild-eyed, desperate like the rest of the city's forgotten. Still, something about the sound unsettled him. It wasn't the bark of threat or hunger. It wasn't territorial. It sounded like, he frowned, a warning. He rubbed at his temple, trying to clear the fog. He hadn't slept long or well. His sleep never came easy anymore. Not since the day life cracked open beneath his feet and swallowed everything he loved. Since he stopped being a father, a husband, a man with a home. Now, he was just a shape beneath a tarp, one of the nameless drifting through the cracks. Another bark. Raymond sat up fully now, blanket slipping off his shoulders, exposing him to the bite of the wind. He hissed sharply as the cold met his skin, cutting through the thin lining of his coat like water through paper. His knees screamed as he stood, hands fumbling for the walking stick he'd made out of a broken chair leg. His fingers, stiff with cold and age, barely gripped it. He shuffled toward the edge of the alley, his boots worn through, soles patched with duct tape. With each step the barking grew louder, closer, and something in it curled into his gut like a memory he couldn't shake. That wasn't just barking. That was calling. He paused as he turned the corner, one hand braced against the wall. A gust of wind slammed into him, nearly toppling his thin frame. But he kept moving. All right, he muttered, more to himself than anyone. I'm coming, damn it. As he limped closer to the source of the noise, he began to see movement through the veil of snow and shadow. A figure at the mouth of the alley, four-legged, pacing, tail low, ears forward. A dog. Raymond narrowed his eyes. The shepherd looked wild, but not feral. Tensed, but not aggressive. The dog stood in the dim glow of the flickering streetlight, looking right at him, eyes like burning amber locked onto his as if willing him forward. And still, it didn't run, didn't bark again. Just stood there, staring, waiting. Raymond took a tentative step forward, raising a hand slightly in caution. "Hey, buddy," he said hoarsely. "What's going on?" The dog didn't move. Then it turned in one swift, deliberate motion and darted back into the alley, but only halfway. It stopped near a cluster of dark shapes on the ground and looked back again, tail flicking once. Raymond's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. He didn't know how, didn't know why, but he felt it. The kind of dread that settles in a man's chest like a storm cloud, old and familiar. He moved faster now, heart thudding against his ribs. The snow had begun to fall again, heavier, and the wind howled louder between the buildings. The dog didn't bark anymore. It didn't need to. It had said what it needed to say. Now it waited, and Raymond followed. The alley seemed to stretch endlessly as Raymond stepped in. The further he walked, the quieter the world became. The wind dulled. The city noises behind him faded to a hush. Even the sound of his own breath seemed distant, as if the night itself was holding something sacred in its grip. Then he saw it, and time just stopped. A German shepherd, frail but solid, curled protectively around a small, motionless bundle in the snow. Its fur, matted and unkempt, clung to the child's body like armor. Steam rose faintly from the dog's breath, mingling with the icy mist in the air. The dog didn't move, not a growl, not a bark. Only his eyes lifted, two amber pools glowing in the dark, and met Raymond's. Raymond's breath caught. There was no menace in that gaze, no warning, only something raw and guttural, something pleading. "Help!" He took a cautious step forward, then another. His boots crunched softly in the snow, the only sound breaking the frozen silence. His cane tapped beside him, half forgotten. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from something closer to reverence. The closer he got, the more the reality of what he was seeing crystallized. The baby, a real baby barely visible beneath a torn gray blanket, was tucked beneath the dog's curled frame. Her tiny limbs unmoving, her skin an unnatural shade of pale. She wasn't just cold. She was close to slipping away. Raymond's knees buckled. He caught himself against the wall. He stared, mouth parted, as emotion surged like a tide he hadn't braced for. It wasn't just what he saw, it was what it triggered. An image flashed in his mind. His own son, Derek, feverish in a hospital bed. The beeping, the silence after it stopped. The way grief had opened his chest and scooped everything out. He thought he'd never feel again. But now, he did. The dog shifted slightly, just enough to let him closer. His body remained curled around the child, like a promise. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just watched, tense, like any wrong move might break the world again. Raymond dropped to his knees beside them. His fingers trembled violently as he reached out, brushing the edge of the soaked blanket. Then gently, reverently, he touched the baby's cheek. Ice. The contact sent a jolt through him. Her skin was too cold. His own hands, already numb, barely registered the chill, but he knew what it meant. He'd seen it in the war, in emergency tents, on sidewalks. This child was seconds, not minutes, from fading. "Oh, God," he breathed, barely a whisper. The dog let out a soft whine, low, urgent, as if to say, "She's yours now." Raymond didn't think, didn't debate. He shrugged off his coat with a sharp motion, the cold stabbing into him like a blade. He wrapped the baby tightly, pulling her against his chest, trying to pass what little warmth he had left into her still frame. She was light, so impossibly light. "Come on now, baby girl," he muttered, voice cracking. "You stay with me, you hear? Just a little longer." The shepherd stood, shook once, then pressed his body against Raymond's side, helping cover the baby, still watching, still guarding. Raymond looked at him and whispered, "You did good. Real good." Snowflakes landed gently on the baby's cheeks. One melted instantly. That was enough to make his chest seize. He bent closer and whispered, "You're safe now. I got you, I got you." For a second, just a second, he thought he saw her lips move and almost sigh, like her lungs remembered what to do. Raymond clutched her tighter, and for the first time in years, the man who had once believed he was already dead inside felt hope come back like a spark in the dark. The shepherd let out a quiet exhale and stepped back just enough to follow when Raymond began to rise. The old man stumbled slightly, bones stiff and trembling, but didn't stop. He had a baby in his arms, a child no one had seen, no one but this dog. And together they stepped back into the cold city toward the unknown. But not alone. The city didn't stop for them. Not for an old man with torn boots and a baby wrapped in a threadbare coat. Not for the gaunt German shepherd pacing beside him like a silent sentinel. The world kept spinning, cars rumbled in the distance, music leaked from half-closed bar doors, neon signs blinked lazily in empty storefront windows. Somewhere, someone was laughing. Somewhere else, someone was crying. But here, in this moment, everything narrowed to the sound of footsteps crunching snow and a baby's uneven breath pressed against Raymond's chest. His arms were locked around the child, coat bundled tightly, one hand supporting her head, the other gripping his cane more for balance than support. His knees screamed with every step, his breath wheezed shallow and hot in the frigid air, but he didn't stop, couldn't stop. Every few feet he glanced down to make sure she was still breathing. He couldn't see much, just the tip of her nose, red from the cold, and the tremble of her tiny lips. But he felt her, the weight of her life now bound to his. Beside him, Shadow ran in perfect rhythm, head low, eyes forward, ears alert. Each step was deliberate, synchronized, like he'd been trained for this very mission. He stayed at Raymond's flank, never darting ahead, never falling behind. As if he understood the path was no longer just about reaching a destination, it was about getting there together. 10 blocks. That's what Raymond had told himself. 10 long blocks to the nearest precinct. 10 blocks between life and loss. And in this bitter stretch of Los Angeles, where the streets glimmered with indifference and the wind howled like memory, it felt like walking through a battlefield again. At Block 2, a man in a hoodie passed them, didn't look twice, didn't ask. At Block 4, a woman across the street slowed to stare, phone glowing in her hand, then kept walking. At Block 6, a bus roared by, spraying slush onto the curb. Raymond nearly slipped, but Shadow pressed against his side to steady him. He didn't speak, didn't say thank you, but the glance he gave the dog was full of something unsaid, something real. By Block 7, Raymond's vision began to blur, not from tears, Not entirely, his body was failing. Lungs too small, muscles too old, bones too tired. His legs weren't built for this. Not anymore. But her breath, he felt it weaken, each exhale less confident than the last. Raymond clenched his jaw, summoned whatever reserves he had left, and pushed forward. His steps were ragged now, less like walking and more like falling forward in rhythm. His mind screamed at him to stop, to sit, to rest. But his heart had already made its choice. He hadn't saved Derek. But maybe, just maybe, he could save her. At Block 8, a homeless man nodded from a doorway, then looked away when he saw the bundle. Maybe he thought Raymond was carrying a corpse. At Block 9, a pair of teenagers exited a convenience store, laughing, holding sodas. One of them froze mid-sip, eyes wide at the sight of Raymond's soaked clothes, the shaking baby, and the dog that looked like it had risen from war. "Should we call someone?" the other murmured. But the old man didn't stop, because he could see it now. The glow, a flickering red-white-blue sign in the haze, LAPD, Mid-City Division. His knees buckled once, just one step short of falling. Shadow pressed his flank against him again, guiding him forward like a living brace. And then, at Block 10, Raymond crossed the final stretch of cracked sidewalk and stepped up to the station door. The wind roared one last time behind him. The city didn't cheer. No spotlight found him. But he had made it, and in his arms, she was still alive. The door flew open with a groan of rusted hinges, slamming against the inside wall as Raymond stumbled through, nearly falling face first into the linoleum. "Help!" he gasped, the word barely more than a wheeze. She's freezing." The fluorescent lights of the precinct cast a sterile glow over everything, cold and flat and unwelcoming. For a second, no one moved. A handful of officers sat at their desks, sipping burnt coffee and filing reports. Then, all at once, chairs scraped, radios crackled, and someone dropped their sandwich. Raymond stood in the entryway like a man who had just walked off the battlefield. His beard was frosted, his coat torn open, soaked through with melting snow. In his arms, wrapped in that threadbare coat, was a motionless bundle far too small for the world. And at his side, the dog. Shadow entered like smoke-silent, eyes sharp, body still humming with the rhythm of the run. His fur, though matted and sparse, bristled with tension. His paws left wet prints on the station floor. His eyes flicked from officer to officer like he was scanning for threats, already placing exits, counting weapons. "Sir, what is this?" an officer asked, stepping forward. "Is that a child?" Raymond dropped to his knees. "She's alive," he said through gasps. "Not for long if you don't help." The baby let out a sound, half whimper, half rattle, barely there. The room snapped into motion. "Call it in code blue, infant exposure. Someone get blankets. I need medics now." A female officer knelt beside Raymond and gently reached for the baby. The moment her hand moved too close, Shadow lunged a low snarl curling from deep in his chest. His eyes blazed and his teeth flashed. "Back off!" someone shouted. Another officer drew instinctively hand on holster. "No!" Raymond barked, louder than he thought he still could. "He's protecting her. He won't bite unless you try to hurt her." Shadow's snarl softened but didn't vanish. He hovered over Raymond's shoulder, eyes locked onto the growing crowd. Raymond turned, coughing hard, his voice gravel. "Shadow, it's okay now. Let them help her. You did good, boy. Real good." The words came like a balm over the tension. Slowly, Shadow stepped back, ears still alert, but teeth hidden. His body remained between the crowd and the child, but the fury in him eased just enough. The officer tried again, more slowly this time. And this time Shadow didn't resist. Blankets appeared, one, then another. The baby was lifted with utmost care into the arms of a paramedic just arriving, wrapped tight, and rushed to the back of an ambulance waiting in the cold. "She's breathing," the medic confirmed, eyes wide. "Barely, but she's hanging on." Raymond let out a breath so deep it sounded like something was leaving his soul. And then his body sagged. "Get him too," another voice said. "He's hypothermic." But Raymond shook his head weakly. "Not me. Just her." Shadow pressed closer to him as they laid him gently onto a stretcher brought inside. One of the paramedics knelt to check his vitals, but Raymond pushed the hand away. "Take the baby to the hospital. Make sure she makes it. Promise me that." "You have my word," the medic said, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You saved her life." Raymond gave a soft, broken laugh. "Not me. It was him." All eyes turned again to the German shepherd, now sitting perfectly still in the middle of the precinct floor. Snowmelt pooled beneath him. His ribs showed with every breath. His eyes, ancient and endless, held nothing but quiet fire. A few officers looked away. One mumbled something about never having seen a stray like that. Another whispered, "That dog doesn't move like a stray." Shadow didn't react. He just sat there, head held high, like he was waiting for orders that hadn't come yet. A female officer crouched down a few feet from him. "What's your story, huh?" she whispered. "Where'd you come from?" Shadow blinked, said nothing. But when the stretcher began to move, when Raymond was rolled toward the exit, toward the waiting ambulance, Shadow stood and followed. Not with hesitation, not with fear, but like a soldier who had found his next post. The emergency room doors burst open, letting in a gust of icy wind, and two paramedics carrying more than just a fading infant. They carried a question of fate, wrapped in thin cotton and desperate heat. "She's hypothermic, bradycardic, non-responsive, possible pulmonary complications," the lead medic shouted as they transferred the baby to the waiting trauma team. The nurses didn't ask where she'd come from. Not yet. All that mattered was what little life remained. Shadow tried to follow, ears perked, tail rigid, eyes locked on the tiny form. But a nurse put out her arm to stop him. "Sir, animals aren't allowed." The dog let out a low growl, not feral, not threatening, more like a warning from something ancient. "He stays," Raymond croaked from behind, hunched in a wheelchair, face pale. He's not just a dog." The nurse faltered. Her eyes scanned the filthy coat still clinging to Raymond's shaking form, then looked again at the shepherd, stoic, snow-streaked, and terrifyingly focused. "You'll be responsible for him," she said after a beat. Raymond nodded. "Yeah, same as he's responsible for her." The sliding doors hissed shut behind them. They wheeled the baby away, and Raymond wasn't allowed to follow, but Shadow was. Not officially, not by rules or permissions, but because he didn't ask. He padded behind the gurney like a sentry, each paw step silent, deliberate. The nurses threw glances over their shoulders, unsure whether to object. But no one did. The shepherd walked like he belonged to something larger than law. When the medical team burst into the resuscitation room, Shadow stopped at the threshold. He didn't whine, didn't bark. He just lay down, front paws crossing like a sphinx, head low, eyes fixed on the child inside. Behind the glass, machines beeped with chilling monotony. A nurse muttered, "Core temperature's dropping again." Another shook her head, whispering, "It's a miracle she's even breathing." "She's not going to make it," a young resident said, too loud. Shadow's ears twitched. He didn't understand the words, but he understood tone, and tone, to a dog like him, was everything. His gaze never left her. Raymond sat slumped on a bench down the hall, near a vending machine with half the bulbs burned out. His hands trembled with more than cold now. His eyes were fixed on the floor, but his mind had spiraled somewhere far away. He heard the beep of a heart monitor, but not hers. He heard his daughter's. He'd sat in a hospital once before, years ago, different town. Same look on the nurses' faces. Pale skin, slurred words, a sudden fever, one missed symptom. They'd said they did everything they could. He remembered the moment he was told she didn't make it. He remembered how the color drained from the walls, how the floor didn't give way beneath him, though it should have. He hadn't cried that night, not properly. He'd just stopped being anything at all. And now, tonight, this stranger, this baby, this broken little flame in a frozen alley. Why had the dog picked her? Why had the night picked him? Raymond swallowed hard. His fingers curled into fists. He glanced down the hall toward the glass door where the dog still lay motionless, unblinking. He envied that stillness. He feared its meaning. Inside the trauma room, a nurse adjusted the heated air blanket. Another administered a line of warm saline. The lead physician gave precise orders, fluid boluses, epinephrine, passive rewarming. And all the while, the dog watched. Not one bark, not one twitch. Only breath slow, steady, and eyes so painfully human in their silence. Hours passed. Shift changes rolled through like tides. The coffee turned cold. The buzz of televisions in waiting rooms faded to background static. Someone mopped the hallway floor in sleepy circles. But Raymond did not sleep. Shadow did not move. And the baby did not die. Not yet. A nurse stepped outside for air. Another returned with coffee and offered one to Raymond. He didn't take it. "She's fighting," the nurse said softly. He nodded, eyes distant. "She has a name?" she added gently. Raymond blinked, looked up. "No," he said. "Not that I know." He turned his head toward the shepherd. "She came from the snow with a ghost," he murmured. "Maybe that's what saved her." The nurse looked puzzled. He didn't explain. Some things don't need explanation. Some things are just known. The hallway was dim now. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a soft flicker, casting long shadows against the linoleum floor. Raymond sat motionless on the worn bench just outside the pediatric emergency unit, the wool of his borrowed blanket scratching at his neck, but he didn't feel it. What he felt was something else entirely, something colder, older, deeper. Shadow lay nearby, his great head resting between his front paws, ears attuned to every muffled sound behind the doors. But even the dog, for now, had surrendered to silence. Raymond closed his eyes, and memory came like winter wind sharp, uninvited, but impossible to ignore. Kandahar, 2006. There had been screaming lots of it. Men torn open by metal, by fire, by bad luck. But he had steady hands back then. Field Medic Raymond Sutter, U.S. Army. Calm under fire. That's what his CO used to say. He'd earned ribbons for valor, for doing the right thing again and again with blood on his boots and shrapnel in his arms. He'd saved lives no one thought savable. But none of that mattered in the end. Not in Ohio, years later. Not in the sterile corridors of St. John's Oncology, where he held Marla's hand as the chemo ravaged her from the inside out. Not when she said, "Ray, it's okay to let me go." And certainly not in that silent hospital room where he'd paced back and forth for hours, waiting for his son's fever to break, only to be told, gently, and much too late, "We're so sorry." Derek's lungs collapsed. It was fast. He remembered holding Derek's small body, remembered how light it was, how wrong that felt. He remembered thinking, why him? Why not me? And from that moment, the world lost color. He didn't leave the hospital that day. He fled. Whiskey dulled the pain for a time. Not long. He tried everything after Marla died: grief counseling, VA support groups, even tried returning to work at the clinic downtown. But every cough reminded him of Derek. Every drawn face reminded him of Marla. Eventually, even his reflection became unbearable. One night he walked out of his apartment to buy milk. He never went back. Now, in the stillness of this hospital, a different hospital, years later, he felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt since before Derek, since before he was the one needing saving. The baby. She didn't have a name, didn't have a coat. She barely had a pulse. But she had fought through the snow, fought to breathe, fought to be found. And somehow, by some impossible twist of fate, she had been found by him, by a ghost of a man, forgotten by the city, the system, and even by himself, and by a dog whose eyes looked like they, too, had seen too much and survived it anyway. Raymond rubbed his hands together, trying to shake off the tremble. It wasn't the cold this time. He could still hear the words from that ER nurse. She's fighting. And it had wrecked something in him. Because that girl in there, she was the shape of every regret he'd never found the courage to face. She was every sleepless night bundled into a single breath. And he didn't even know her name. Shadow lifted his head suddenly. A faint whine escaped him. Raymond followed the shepherd's gaze to the closed emergency doors. "She's still in there," he whispered, still holding on. The dog looked at him then, really looked. Not like an animal, not like a pet, more like an equal, a soldier, maybe, or a sentinel. Raymond felt the pressure behind his eyes, sharp and rising. He had no idea if she'd make it through the night. But he knew, without question, that something had shifted in him. A baby, a stray dog, a broken man. And somehow, the three of them had collided in the kind of silence that stops the world. He lowered his head and rested his palm against the dog's shoulder. "You didn't just find her out there," he murmured. "You found me too." Inside the hospital room, under fluorescent light and the sterile hush of machines, Shadow lay motionless. The baby slept, now small breaths, raspy, but present. Her chest rose and fell beneath the blanket Raymond had tucked around her. Shadow didn't close his eyes. He couldn't, because memory had come unbidden, and with it, pain older than winter. He was once called Rex, badge number K9384, partner to Officer Brian Kim, LAPD gang unit. 5 years of service, 32 raids, countless lives saved. He hadn't been a ghost then. He had been the edge of the blade moving with the wind, sensing danger before it had a name. He remembered the echo of Brian's boots beside his own paws, the way his partner's voice dropped to a whisper just before a breach. "Ready, boy? With me." He always was, until that night. South Crenshaw. Warehouse sting. The suspects had more firepower than intelligence, but it didn't matter. It only took one lucky shot. The crack of gunfire. Brian went down like his strings had been cut. Shadow lunged forward, but hands grabbed him back, yelling, chaos. But he'd broken free and returned to where his partner lay, bleeding eyes wide, mouth trying to say something that wouldn't come. Shadow stayed there. Blood soaking the pavement, sirens distant. The street lamp overhead blinked, flickered, then stayed dark. He didn't move, not for hours, not until they came at dawn, and someone had to pry him off the cooling body of the man he would have died for. He remembered the voices after that, clinical, detached. K9 exhibited obsessive loyalty, inconsolable, showed signs of stress aggression during intake, too unstable for civilian adoption. No one called him a hero. No one said he had done what he was trained to do. Instead, he was given a number, a stamp, and a silent end. They signed off on his retirement like closing a file. And then he was gone. Not to a family, not to a warm backyard, but to the alleys, the in-between places. The cold, the body had stayed strong for a time. He hunted rats, avoided fights, endured the hunger that came in waves. But his mind? His mind remained in that warehouse, every clang of a dumpster, every echo of a bootstep. Every time a man's voice echoed down an alley, Shadow turned. For a second he thought, Brian? And every time the answer was silence. He could have become feral, could have turned on the world, but something deeper held, a whisper beneath the instinct, a voice. You're with me, right, boy? Always. He didn't forget the training, didn't forget the structure, didn't forget how to listen for a heartbeat, how to move low and slow through the dark, how to protect something small and fragile by curling around it with every inch of his body. Even as the city forgot him, he held to that last purpose like marrow in his bones. And then, 2 nights ago, he caught the scent, fragile, small, human, but unfamiliar, a baby's scent. It cut through everything, through rot, through snow, through time. He had followed it, not because he knew what he would find, but because that whisper buried deep beneath scars and frost and memory told him, go, because someone needed him again. Shadow blinked now, lifting his head from the floor beside the child's cot. The machines beeped softly. Her fingers twitched in sleep. He exhaled, long, low, tired, and though no one could hear it, somewhere inside him, a name lingered. Rex. The dog who once served, who once mattered, who had fallen, yes, but had not forgotten who he was. Not when it counted. The fluorescent light above flickered once before settling into a soft, mechanical hum. It was well past midnight. The hospital waiting room was nearly empty. Just a flickering TV mounted high on the wall, tuned to muted news no one was watching. A janitor pushed a mop quietly down the hall, the smell of antiseptic trailing behind. On the far end of the vinyl bench, slouched against cracked upholstery, sat Raymond. His coat was gone, left with the baby. His shirt was torn. His fingers were raw. Next to him, curled not out of fatigue but instinct, was Shadow. The German shepherd's ears twitched at every overhead announcement, but his eyes remained fixed on the hallway door, the one that led to pediatrics, the one that had swallowed the baby girl still nameless into its bright white corridors. Raymond let out a slow, weathered sigh. His back ached. His knees throbbed, but more than anything, his heart felt unsteady. That tiny thing, that barely breathing bundle, had stirred something in him, something that had stayed buried since Derek died. A cough rattled his chest. He pressed a hand to it, wincing. Then, a soft tap of nails on tile. Shadow shifted. His muzzle nudged something across the bench. Raymond looked down. It was a plastic tray, the kind nurses gave out during long waits. On it, a peanut butter sandwich, a small cup of apple juice, and 2 crackers still in plastic wrap. Shadow had taken the tray in his mouth without a sound and brought it to Raymond's side. Now, the dog looked up at him, not begging, offering. Raymond blinked. A beat passed. Then slowly he smiled, not wide, not whole, but real. "Guess you're not hungry," he muttered, voice cracked from cold and memory. Shadow sat back on his haunches, eyes steady, head tilted, as if to say, "You need it more." Raymond picked up the sandwich, broke it in 2. He held out one half to the dog. "You earned it." Shadow sniffed it, just a light touch of his nose. Then, carefully, he took the piece between his teeth and lay down to chew. The silence between them grew warm, not filled, but shared. Like men who'd seen too much and didn't need words to name it. Raymond leaned back, the juice untouched in his hand. His gaze dropped to Shadow's flank, scarred in places, fur matted where age and hardship had won battles skin deep. "You've been through it too, huh?" he whispered. "Not just a stray, not just a dog." Shadow didn't look up, but his tail thumped once, slow and deliberate, against the linoleum floor. Raymond stared at him for a long while. Then he nodded. "I don't know why you found her," he said, voice low and rough, "or why you didn't leave." A pause. "But I'm damn glad you didn't." The words settled between them. Outside the window, the city was still breathing, barely, but breathing. A few sirens in the distance, a gust of wind that rattled the glass. Raymond finished the rest of the sandwich without tasting it. Shadow watched the hallway, and in that strange stillness, 2 lives that had been discarded by time, tragedy, and the unforgiving machinery of life sat side by side on a bench no one else noticed. They didn't know it yet, but something had already shifted. The moment Shadow nudged that tray, the moment Raymond shared his bread, a thread had been sewn. Not just in hunger or cold, but in purpose. 2 broken souls, 1 silent promise, not again, not this time, not her. The first rays of dawn filtered through the east-facing windows of the hospital, painting sterile white walls with gold. Raymond had drifted into a shallow, broken sleep on the bench, head bowed, arms crossed, boots splayed out beneath him like a man who hadn't known a bed in years. Shadow had remained curled beside the door, unmoving, eyes half-lidded but always watching. When the click of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor, Shadow was the first to rise. The nurse was young, her scrubs wrinkled, hair tucked hastily under a cap, but her face, there was something different in her face. A quiet glow behind her eyes, a softness reserved for good news. "Mr. Raymond?" Raymond stirred, blinking as if pulled from underwater. "Yeah?" She smiled gently, voice low, reverent. "She's alive." For a moment Raymond didn't move. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible-like, a language he hadn't heard in a long time. The nurse nodded again, stepping closer. "The baby, she's stable," Still in intensive care but breathing on her own. No signs of organ failure. Raymond sat upright. His mouth opened but no sound came out. She had hypothermia, respiratory failure, and signs of malnourishment. The nurse continued, her voice now tinged with awe. But the attending physician said one thing saved her. That dog's body heat, and the fact you brought her in when you did. If either of you had been even 5 minutes later. She trailed off. Raymond swallowed hard. His hands were trembling. Shadow stepped forward and sat beside him, silent but resolute, as if he already knew. Raymond looked at him, really looked at him. "You did it," he whispered. His voice cracked at the edges. Shadow simply stared back, those deep, intelligent eyes steady. He didn't wag his tail, didn't bark, just stayed close, breathing in rhythm, the way he had the night before, wrapped around a soul barely clinging to life. The nurse glanced between the two of them, then lowered her gaze. "She'll be in observation for a few more days," she said softly. "But she made it through the night. Miraculously." Raymond nodded, but he couldn't speak. His lips trembled. The nurse placed a hand on his shoulder and left quietly, letting the moment be. And then, in that silence too sacred to be broken, something inside Raymond cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just released. The first tear slipped down his weathered cheek like a drop of rain down sunburned earth. Then another and another. He didn't sob, didn't heave. He just sat there, weeping silently, as if his body had forgotten how and was now remembering, drop by drop, pain by pain. Shadow stayed beside him, still, watching, protecting. Because dogs like him didn't need to understand language to know what grief looked like, or what healing felt like. Raymond buried his face in his hands. Not since the day Derek died had he allowed himself this kind of breakage. Not when Marla passed, not when he lost his home, not when he found himself sleeping on concrete with nothing but breath and memories. But now there was something fragile and alive in the world because he hadn't given up. Because a dog who should have turned away didn't. Because they did not leave her. He looked up, eyes glassy, voice hoarse. "She's gonna live." Shadow tilted his head slightly, as if absorbing the weight of the words. Raymond reached out, his calloused fingers resting gently against the dog's thick neck. "You kept her breathing, boy." His voice shook. "And now maybe I can start breathing again, too." The sun had fully breached the skyline now, and for the first time in years, the day didn't feel cruel. It felt earned. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of machines and the distant murmur of a television left on low in the waiting lounge. The baby slept behind glass now, wrapped in fresh linens, a warming lamp glowing above her like some holy sentinel. Raymond sat by the window with a paper cup of lukewarm coffee in his hands. He hadn't touched it. Shadow lay at his feet, ears twitching now and then, alert even in rest. That's when the door clicked open. The woman who entered moved with calm purpose. Civilian clothes, dark jeans, long coat, badge clipped to her hip. Her eyes scanned the room, sharp but not unkind. A notebook in one hand, file folder in the other. "Raymond Jennings?" she asked. Raymond nodded. "Yeah, that's me." She stepped forward, extending a hand. "Detective Rena Solis. I'm with LAPD's Missing Persons." Raymond took her hand-rough palms, weathered grip. She didn't sit until he gestured. Shadow watched her, unblinking. "We found the mother," she said gently, opening the folder. "Her name is Selena Alvarez. 19, no fixed address, no papers, no history in any system, school, medical, immigration. She's been off-grid for a long time. Raymond said nothing, just stared out the window, his jaw slackening. She came forward early this morning, walked into a clinic 3 miles from here, said she saw her baby on the news, gave a statement. Rena paused, letting that sink in. She didn't abandon her out of malice, the detective added. According to her, she was living in a squat behind the textile district. No heat, no food. Said the baby hadn't cried in 2 days. She panicked. Raymond's voice, when it came, was low and steady. She left her in that alley. Rena nodded. Wrapped in an old jacket. Covered her as best she could. Said she waited nearby for over an hour. No one came. A muscle in Raymond's cheek twitched. She said she thought, if someone found her, maybe the baby had a chance. Rena's tone didn't carry judgment, just fact, just the weight of choices made in the dark. Raymond looked down at his hands. You believe her? I do, Rena replied. We're not charging her. There's no evidence of neglect beyond desperation. Social services is involved, but... She hesitated. It's complicated. Raymond nodded slowly. Of course it was. He didn't need to hear the rest. Didn't need to hear how immigration status might override mercy, or how public opinion would split down the middle, or how one wrong headline could paint Selena as either a monster or a martyr. He'd seen this story before, intense along Skid Row, in eyes that wouldn't meet his under freeway overpasses, in his own reflection once. She's still a kid, he muttered. She is, Rena agreed. She came to the hospital, asked to see the baby. Raymond looked up. And? She stood outside the nursery window for 5 minutes, then left. Didn't say a word. Silence fell like snow. Raymond leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Some people think you gotta be evil to walk away from your kid, he said quietly. But I think sometimes you just gotta be broken. Rena closed her notebook. You don't judge her, she said. Raymond met her gaze. Lady, I've done things just to get through the night. Things that made me hate the man I saw in the mirror. I don't got the luxury of judgment. Shadow lifted his head slightly, pressing his side into Raymond's boot. Rena watched the interaction, something softening in her face. She left her wrapped in hope, Raymond added, more to himself than anyone else, hoping someone would come. He exhaled long and slow. Then, almost as an afterthought, she wasn't wrong. Rena stood, closing the folder gently. If the child pulls through, there'll be choices. Custody, guardianship, hearings. It's not over. Raymond gave a small nod. I'll be here. She reached into her coat, handed him a card. If you remember anything about that night, the alley, the surroundings, call me. He took the card, tucking it into his coat pocket. But they both knew this wasn't about facts anymore. It was about what came next. She paused at the door. Raymond? Yeah? She's lucky you were there. He didn't answer right away, just stared through the window where the dawn had already given way to another gray Los Angeles morning. Maybe I needed to be. By mid-morning, the hospital had started to breathe again. The chaos of the night had settled into that slow rhythm unique to places where lives teeter and return. Nurses rotated shifts, murmuring quietly behind counters. The pediatric wing, once tense and taut, now moved like a tide just beginning to recede. Raymond sat near the nursery glass, arms crossed tight over his chest. His eyes hadn't left the incubator since sunrise. Behind him, footsteps approached, then paused. "She's stronger today?" one of the nurses whispered. "Fighting. That baby's a little warrior." Raymond didn't look up, but something in his posture softened. "And the dog?" another voice joined, a younger nurse with bright eyes and tired feet. "He's been there all night, didn't move, didn't bark, just watched her." "He's not just a dog," the first one said. "He's a hero." Raymond let out a dry breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Shadow was curled near the corner of the waiting room, head resting between his front paws, but alert, always alert. His coat had finally begun to dry, and someone had laid a thin blanket over him during the night. The word hero hung in the air, echoing longer than it had a right to. Raymond stood, walked slowly to where the dog lay. Shadow lifted his head as he approached, ears twitching. His eyes locked on Raymond's with that same quiet intensity, like he was always ready, always waiting for the next thing that might need protecting. Raymond crouched beside him, joints groaning in protest. "You hear that?" he muttered, voice gruff but gentle. "They're calling you a hero." Shadow blinked. "You probably don't care," Raymond added, "but I do." There was a long pause, and then something in him shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was real. The kind of shift that happens in the heart after years of silence. "I can't keep calling you dog," Raymond murmured, brushing the fur near Shadow's shoulder. "That don't seem fair, not after what you done." Shadow tilted his head. Raymond swallowed. His fingers hovered, unsure, before finally settling on the base of the dog's neck. "You earned a name, same as any man who's walked through fire and didn't turn back." The silence wrapped around them like cloth, then softly, deliberately. "Valor," he said it once, just once. And Shadow, "No," Valor responded, ears up, tail tapped once against the floor. Not wild, not excited, just certain, as if something locked away had heard its echo. Raymond sat back, surprised by the reaction. A lump rose in his throat before he could stop it. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. "That's it, ain't it?" The dog didn't move again. He didn't need to. The name hung between them like an oath. Not given. Earned. Something stirred deep in Raymond's chest, beyond fatigue, beyond grief. A pull he hadn't felt in years. The need not just to survive, but to protect. To take what had been broken and dare to carry it forward. He looked toward the nursery, where a tiny chest rose and fell under layers of wires and care. "She's got a fight ahead," he muttered, mostly to himself. "But she's not alone." Then turning back to the dog, now watching him with those unblinking soldier's eyes, "Neither are you." And in that sliver of stillness between name and silence, between instinct and intent, Raymond knew this wasn't about saving one life anymore. It was about keeping it safe. It started with a photo, no press release, no curated caption, just a moment quiet, real, and taken by a nurse who hadn't planned on capturing anything more than a fleeting miracle before the next patient arrived. In the photo, the baby, still fragile, wrapped in too many wires and tubes, lay in her incubator, a soft pink hat pulled low over her brow. Beside her, pressed against the glass like a sentinel carved from loyalty, was Valor, curled, watchful, unmoving, his eyes wide open, guarding not out of command but out of something deeper, something unspoken. The nurse didn't even add a filter. She simply wrote, "He hasn't left her side. We don't know his full story, but we know this: he's the reason she's alive. #DogHero had Guardian Valor. She posted it during her break, stepped outside for a breath of winter air. By the time she returned, the hospital's phones were ringing off the hook. Within the hour, it had crossed 100,000 shares. By nightfall, the world had seen them. Local stations were first. A camera crew showed up in the lobby, polite but insistent. Then a van from a regional affiliate. Then CNN. Then Univision. Producers called from New York. A morning show wanted to interview the man and the miracle dog. Another asked if they could use the footage of Raymond crying beside the NICU glass. Someone had caught it on a nurse's phone. Raymond had no idea any of it was happening. He was back in the hallway, hands folded, back curved like the weight of the last 24 hours had finally settled. Valor sat beside him, head resting on one paw, but ears twitching, always listening. A young intern approached carefully. "Mr. Raymond?" He looked up. I thought you should know. The story, it's everywhere. People are calling the hospital. They want to donate or help or—" She paused. "Adopt him." Raymond's jaw tightened. "They want what?" he asked, more out of surprise than anger. She stepped back slightly. "The dog. People think he should be in a good home. Some celebrities are tweeting about him. Someone said he should be the face of an awareness campaign." Valor yawned, as if unimpressed by fame. Raymond rubbed his temples. "He's not some mascot. He's—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Not out loud. Not yet. The intern just nodded and left, realizing she'd wandered into something far deeper than she could understand. Upstairs, a nurse scrolled through comments on her phone. "This is what love looks like. Can we find out who that man is? He deserves a second chance, too. Name that baby. Give her a fighting name. She's already a survivor." Someone made a fan art sketch Valor in front of a shield made of glass with the words Guardian Valor etched beneath. Someone else created a hashtag campaign. For Ilya, a name lifted from the hospital chart that, until now, had only been known by 3 nurses and Raymond. He hadn't even said it aloud yet. By midnight, the hospital had to assign someone just to filter calls. Food deliveries arrived for the staff. A local veterans group sent flowers. One package came with no note, just a hand-carved wooden plaque that read, "Heroes come on 4 legs, too." Raymond stood quietly beside the front desk as all of it happened, watching the blur of kindness rush in from a world he'd long ago stopped expecting anything from. He turned to Valor. The dog looked up, calm, unmoved by the frenzy. But something in his eyes flickered, like he knew, even if he didn't care. "You okay with all this attention?" Raymond asked under his breath. Valor licked his chops and laid his head back down. Raymond smiled. "Didn't think so." But inside that smile was something deeper. He wasn't used to being seen, not anymore. Not after drifting so long through alleyways and shadows. Now, because of one photo, because of one moment frozen in time, he wasn't invisible. Neither was Valor. And neither was that baby girl. Not anymore. The camera framed her in soft morning light. Selena sat on a bench outside the family shelter, hands knotted in her lap, sleeves pulled down over trembling fingers. Her eyes were swollen from nights of silence, but clear, determined. Her voice cracked at first, but steadied as she spoke, not to defend, not to excuse, but to tell the truth. "I didn't abandon her. she said, barely louder than the wind brushing past the microphone. I left her so she could be found. The reporter said nothing, just listened. I wrapped her in my only blanket, tucked her close to the church fence. I waited until I saw someone walking by. I thought maybe they'd hear her. Maybe they'd care more than the world cared for me. A long pause. I was 17 when I crossed. I've been hiding ever since. She looked away from the camera, shame curling at the edge of her lips. I didn't want her to hide. The interview aired that evening. Just a 4-minute clip on a local station. It should have disappeared between war updates and weather reports. But something in her face, its rawness, its simplicity, refused to be forgotten. And the world, already stirred by the image of Valor curled beside the tiny baby in the NICU, leaned in closer. Offers came pouring in. A women's legal foundation pledged to help her fight any charges and apply for asylum. A nonprofit specializing in trauma counseling sent a car to the shelter, offering transportation to sessions, no questions asked. One parenting program in Pasadena offered her a full room and board for a year. In the comments, people shifted. Some had judged her, swiftly and harshly when the story first broke. Now they softened. She's a child herself. We can save both of them. Redemption doesn't erase what she did, but maybe this is what grace looks like. No mother who leaves her baby with a blanket near a church truly wants to let go. Raymond sat in the hospital cafeteria when the segment aired on the mounted television. He watched alone, coffee untouched in front of him. Beside him, Valor lay curled against the booth wall, his ears perked slightly at the sound of Selena's voice. Her Spanish was slow and precise, halting in the way of someone who had spent too much time keeping quiet. Raymond leaned forward, elbows on the table. He didn't blink much as the screen showed the shelter's cracked walkway, the donated toys in a basket beside her chair, the way she clutched the frayed sleeve of her sweater as she talked about the weight of hope. He didn't judge her. He couldn't. Later that night, he sat alone in the hospital chapel, stained glass shadows dancing over his weathered face. The baby Elia, they called her now, was still sleeping, still monitored but stable. A nurse had even smiled and said she had a fighter's lungs now. He should have felt peace. Instead, he felt the weight of decision pressing on him like gravity. He didn't know if it was legal or fair or even sane, but deep down, in the marrow of his bones, Raymond wanted her. Not as a symbol, not because he'd found her, because somehow that tiny girl had found him. And Valor? Valor had stood guard over them both. But now there was a mother. Not a monster, not a ghost, but a girl with the same haunted look Raymond had worn when he lost his own family. He stared at the altar. "I ain't trying to steal her," he whispered, voice rough. "But if I let go now, what if nobody ever holds her like she needs?" Valor padded softly into the chapel and sat beside him, resting his chin on Raymond's knee. Raymond looked down. "We're not the only ones hurt in this world, boy," he said. "And maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not meant to fix it all. Just carry a little bit of it so others don't have to." He exhaled, shaky and slow. "But damn, I wish I knew what was right." Outside, headlines shifted again. From abandonment to advocacy, Selena's story. Redemption rising trends nationwide. The girl, the dog, and the man who wouldn't let go. But inside the hospital, it wasn't about stories or screens. It was about a baby girl wrapped in monitors, a dog with the patience of saints, and a man with nothing left to give except everything. The papers lay on the table between them. Raymond stared at them like they were something sacred, like signing them might tear open some part of the sky that had only just begun to stitch itself back together. Selina sat across from him. Her face was calm, but her fingers fidgeted in her lap, betraying the storm beneath. A caseworker sat silently at the corner of the small beige room, there not to interfere, only witness. "I thought I'd feel relief," she said softly, her eyes never leaving the little plastic bracelet on her wrist. "But I just feel like I'm learning how to breathe all over again." Raymond didn't interrupt. He knew better than to try and rush someone through pain. "She's better with you," Selina continued. "You didn't walk away. You didn't even hesitate." He shook his head gently. "I did hesitate, every second. I just didn't know how to leave." The silence between them was different now, no longer heavy, but full of fragile grace. Selina reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Crayon scribbles covered the front, blues, purples, shapes that looked like stars, or maybe snowflakes. "I made it for her," she said. "It's stupid. I know she can't read or hold anything yet, but I wanted her to have something from me. Something small." Raymond took the paper like it was made of glass. She looked at him, then truly looked. No shame, just a raw, aching honesty. "If she calls someone Dad someday," her voice cracked, "I hope it's you." It landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Raymond's throat tightened. Words warred with emotion in his chest. When he finally spoke, it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It was just real. "You're braver than anyone gives you credit for, Selina." She blinked hard, like the compliment stung. "You didn't throw her away," he continued. "You gave her a chance. That takes more courage than most people ever find." Tears welled in her eyes now, but she nodded, slowly, decisively. Then, with a deep breath and trembling hand, Selina reached for the pen and signed the line. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. When it was done, she set the pen down and stood. "Tell her I loved her enough to choose what was right," she whispered. "I will," Raymond said, rising too. "And when she's old enough to ask, I'll tell her about a young woman who walked through fire to give her the world." She gave him one last look, one that held sorrow and peace and something that felt like absolution. Then she turned and walked out. The door clicked softly behind her. Raymond stood there for a moment, staring at the line where her name now lived on the page. Then he turned to Valor, who had been watching quietly from the corner. "She didn't run," Raymond murmured. "She handed her over with open hands." Valor stepped closer, rested his head gently against Raymond's hip. "Guess we've got a family now, huh?" The dog's tail gave one slow, deliberate thump against the floor, and in that sterile room filled with paperwork and echoes of things that couldn't be undone, something unspoken passed between man and dog. A promise. The mailbox was new, shiny, red, and still smelled of factory paint. The house behind it was small, barely 800 square feet, but to Raymond, it looked like a cathedral. The porch creaked when he stepped onto it. The key stuck a little in the lock. And the moment the door swung open, a warm breath of cedar and fresh paint greeted them. Home. Behind him, Aaliyah cooed softly in her sling, her tiny hands reaching toward nothing in particular, content. And at his side, Valor padded in quietly, sniffing each corner like a soldier sweeping a new post. Raymond set down the duffel bag, half full with diapers, dog treats, and hope, and stood still, just breathing. He never thought he'd be the kind of man to get a second chance. The grant had come in fast. A local non-profit moved by the story, by the image of a broken-down man and a discarded dog saving a life, launched what they called the Valor Fund, designed for the unseen heroes, homeless veterans, abandoned service animals, families in between hope and nowhere. Within 2 weeks, donations flooded in. Within a month, the deed to the house was in his name. It wasn't just charity. It was belief. The walls were painted a soft wheat color. The kitchen had a working stove, though Raymond barely remembered how to cook anything beyond canned stew. There was a second-hand crib in the corner of what used to be an office, now bathed in morning light. And in the living room, against the far wall, sat a new dog, bed gray, memory foam, and stitched with the name Valor in bold navy letters. The dog sniffed it, then looked at Raymond, then back at the crib. He didn't even hesitate. Instead of lying down on the expensive bed gifted to him by well-wishers, Valor walked straight to the crib, circled once, and lay down beneath it. His chin rested on crossed paws, eyes fixed upward, body still except for the slow rise and fall of breath. A guardian, not a guest. Raymond chuckled softly. "Guess I should have saved the receipt." Alia gurgled in agreement, her gaze drifting toward the patch of sun where Valor lay. Her tiny fingers opened and closed, as if she somehow knew that down there, just beneath her, was the one who had kept her alive. Later that night, Raymond stood in the doorway of the nursery, arms folded across his chest, watching them both. He still wore the hospital band on his wrist. He hadn't brought himself to take it off, like it was a reminder that none of this was guaranteed, that life, as fragile as breath, could shift in an instant. He thought of the street, the rain, the dumpster, the blood. He thought of the girl's mother and what it must have cost her to let go. He thought of the look in Valor's eyes when they first met, that mix of readiness and sorrow, the stare of someone who had waited too long to be needed again. And now, here they were, one man, one dog, one child. No headlines anymore, no camera crews, just the hush of night and the promise of tomorrow. Raymond knelt by the crib, reached in, and gently pulled the blanket up to Ilia's chin. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Then, before standing, he reached out and ran a hand along Valor's back. The dog didn't move, but his tail thudded once, quiet and certain. A signal. We're home. The first diaper change was a disaster. Raymond stood in the center of the nursery at 2:12 a.m. Ilia squirming like a tiny octopus on the changing table, her cries climbing up an octave every second. The soft yellow nightlight flickered as if in sympathy. Valor sat in the corner, head tilted, ears twitching at each wail. "Okay, okay, okay," Raymond muttered, voice half shaky, half panicked. He had the clean diaper ready, the wipes too. But the moment he unfastened the old one, Ilia kicked wildly, and the horror began. One foot into the dirty diaper, one hand in her mouth, and a swift, triumphant stream of pee arcing straight onto Raymond's flannel shirt. He froze. Valor huffed audibly, then sneezed as if in judgment. Raymond looked at the dog, then the baby, then down at his soaked chest, and burst into laughter. Not the kind of laughter that came from joy exactly, but the kind that cracked through something heavy. That broke the surface of sorrow like sunlight through fog. Elia's screams paused for a moment, startled by the strange sound. Valor padded closer, sniffed the air with deep canine concern, then tried to catch the fallen pacifier rolling toward the dresser. His giant paws missed it twice. Then, with all the earnestness in the world, he nudged it up with his nose and carried it gently, carefully, to Raymond's leg. "Good boy," Raymond whispered, wiping tears of laughter from the corners of his eyes. "You've got better hands than I do." They managed, somehow, each night like that, fumbling, failing, learning. Midnight feedings turned into 3 a.m. lullabies, Raymond humming hoarsely, off-key, while Elia nursed from her bottle, cradled in his elbow. Valor would lie at his feet, always within reach, always alert. When Raymond rocked her to sleep, the dog's breathing seemed to sync with hers, slow, deep, grounding. Some nights he didn't sleep at all. He would sit in the glider, Elia curled against his chest, her heartbeat barely louder than a whisper, her breath warm against his collarbone. He'd feel the weight of her, real and fragile and alive. And it scared him. He remembered Marla's hands, thin and trembling by the end. Remembered the way Derek's cough wouldn't stop that final night, no matter how many warm cloths or prayers he pressed against it. They had both slipped away. And yet here, in his arms, was life's stubborn, loud, clumsy life. "God, you're strong," he murmured once, brushing her hairless head. "You came back from the edge and didn't even know it." Valor stirred beside the crib, as if in agreement. Raymond looked at him. This dog who had been labeled too broken, too unstable, too much trouble. A dog who had stood over a dead partner for hours in the dark and didn't run. A dog who had braved the cold to lie beside a baby and keep her alive. And now here he was, guarding a nursery as if it were a vault. Raymond lowered his voice, the words thick in his throat. "I missed the chance once," he whispered to Elia. Not again. The house settled around them, creaking gently like it understood. Outside, the winter wind softened, brushing against the window panes. Elia's breathing evened out, lashes fluttering, fingers still curled near his heart. Raymond held her tighter. This time, he would stay. The auditorium smelled faintly of crayons and cafeteria lunches. Rows of folding chairs were packed with third-graders swinging their feet, whispering behind hands, barely containing the buzz of anticipation. Paper banners lined the walls, crayon drawings of dogs with capes, paw prints, stars. In the center, a wide poster read in careful block letters, "Thank you, Valor." Raymond stood backstage, smoothing down the collar of his only clean shirt. His hands trembled not from fear, but from something deeper. Reverence, nerves tied to memory. Valor sat beside him, calm and majestic in his black and tan coat. Someone had placed a small blue ribbon around his neck that read, "Honor Guest." He didn't seem to mind. His amber eyes scanned the space, alert but at ease, tail occasionally tapping the floor. "Ready?" a young teacher asked gently. Raymond gave a short nod. As they walked onto the stage, a hush swept the room. Valor padded beside him, every head turning to follow the dog's steady gait. Gasps rose from the front rows. One little girl covered her mouth in awe. A boy clutched his stuffed animal tighter. They took their place at the podium. Raymond leaned toward the mic, cleared his throat. His voice cracked slightly as he began. I never thought I'd be standing in a place like this again." He glanced at the sea of young faces. Their innocence was disarming, their eyes wide, unfiltered. "This is Valor," he said, gesturing to the dog sitting at his side. "He's not just a hero. He's a second chance." The children leaned in. Raymond went on to tell the story. Not the version that had gone viral, but the quiet truth. How he'd once been lost in his own city. How life had worn him down. How he'd stopped believing he had anything left to give. And then, a baby was left in the cold, and this dog, he paused, voice trembling, this dog curled around her and waited. He swallowed hard. He didn't know if anyone would come, but he waited. Silence. And that baby, she lived. He reached down, resting a hand on Valor's head. But that night it wasn't just her he saved. It was me too. Because in saving her, I remembered what it meant to be needed, to be trusted again, to have purpose. His voice had lowered into a near whisper now, but it carried. He saved more than one life that night. For a beat, no one moved. Then a single clap echoed. Then two. Then the room rose, teachers, students, parents standing in unison, a wave of small hands clapping, a few children shouting, "Yay, Valor!" at the top of their lungs. Valor tilted his head, ears perked in curiosity. His tail thumped once, then again, as if he understood. Raymond stepped back, overwhelmed. He hadn't cried in front of anyone in years. Not at funerals, not in the shelter, not even when he signed the guardianship papers for Elia. But here, surrounded by little hearts that hadn't yet learned to be cynical, who saw a dog and called him good without condition, something inside broke open. He turned his face slightly, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. A teacher came forward and handed him a drawing. It was of Valor beside a crib. A stick figure with gray hair stood next to him, labeled Mr. Raymond, Elia's hero. He took it, fingers trembling. Valor nudged his thigh gently, grounding him. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. But deep down, he was beginning to believe, maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about deserving. It was about being there, when it counted. And this time, he had been. It started with a whimper, barely audible beneath the radiator's hum, but Valor heard it first. Raymond stirred from the couch just as the dog barked once, steady, alert. Then he saw her. Elia, twisted under the blanket, cheeks flushed deep crimson. Her breaths were shallow, forehead burning. His heart froze. Another crib, another fever, another child helpless in the dark. His body remembered what his mind had buried. Derek. Gone before he could come home. A fever that crept in while Raymond slept. He hadn't moved fast enough. Valor barked again louder, circled the crib, then sprinted to the door, pawing frantically. Okay, Raymond stammered, scooping Elia into a blanket with shaking hands. He strapped her into the back seat like it was a ritual, checking twice, then again. Valor leapt in beside him. The drive to the ER was a blur of flashing lights and whispered bargaining. "Stay with me, baby girl. Please." At the hospital, they rushed her inside. A nurse took her with calm, practiced hands. "You did the right thing." Raymond collapsed into a plastic chair. Valor pressed into his legs, grounding him. A doctor arrived, young, kind eyes. "She has an infection. Treatable. She's going to be fine." Raymond's breath caught. A sob escaped, silent but consuming. His body shook, this time not from grief, relief. Valor placed both paws on his thigh, leaning in like a weight meant to anchor. The doctor smiled. "Whatever made you act saved her." Raymond looked down. "It wasn't me," he said hoarsely. "It was him." Later, with Elia sleeping peacefully in his arms, Raymond sat in the quiet hospital room. Valor curled at his feet, a sentinel. For once, time felt still, and he'd arrived in time. He leaned down, kissed her damp forehead. "I'm here," he whispered. "I swear to God, I'm not letting go." But sleep didn't come easily. At home, long after Elia had drifted off, Raymond sat at the kitchen table in the flickering light of a dying bulb, cold coffee untouched, hands clasped. What kind of man tries again? He saw Derek. That mop of black hair, that half-toothed smile. The memory returned like a blade of another night, another fever, and silence that never left. "I should have let someone younger raise her," he muttered. "Someone better." The kitchen answered with silence, until the soft creak of paws on old wood. Valor entered wordless. No command, just presence. He pressed his chin into Raymond's thigh, then nudged under his arm, anchoring him. Raymond let his hand fall to the thick fur behind Valor's ear. "You remember when I said I didn't believe in second chances?" Valor's tail tapped once. Raymond chuckled bitterly. "You're proving me wrong every damn day." The fear didn't vanish, but for once, it didn't win. Rain tapped the windows gently the next morning. The house smelled faintly of oatmeal and hospital linen. Elia slept peacefully. Valor curled beside her crib, one ear tilted, watching, guarding. At the kitchen table, Raymond held a notepad like it might shatter. He hadn't written a letter in 20 years, but some things needed ink. He stared at the blank page, then began. "Dear Derek, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, or if it even matters, but it matters to me. I think I've found a piece of you again. Her name's Elia. You'd like her. She's got this stubborn squint when she doesn't get her way and a laugh that sneaks up on you. Last night she got sick, and for a second I saw you. Same weight in my arms, same helplessness, same fear. But this time I didn't run. I stayed. I'm still here." The page blurred. He blinked. "Thank you. Not for leaving, but for living. You taught me what it means to show up, even late, even scared, even when your hands shake. I wasn't ready for you. But losing you made me ready for her, and I think that counts. So if you're watching, just know, I'm going to give her every moment I never gave you. Let her fall asleep on my chest. Laugh with her. Be a father again." He folded the letter carefully. No stamp, just one word on the envelope. Derek. The nursery was dim. Elia stirred but didn't wake. Valor lifted his head but didn't bark. Raymond knelt by the crib. Beneath it, a box, decades old. Inside, a lock of hair, a crayon drawing, blue sky, green stick figures. Me and Dad and Mom and a dog. He placed the letter inside, closed it gently, whispered, "You'll always be part of this, son." Then he sat there a while, hand on the crib leg, eyes closed, listening, to breath, to memory, to something bigger than both. Then he rose, ran his hand through Valor's fur, and left the nursery door open just a crack. Because love once found again doesn't hide in the dark anymore. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that slips by quiet and unnoticed, caught somewhere between the last breath of spring and the first sigh of summer. The air was soft, warm enough for bare feet, and the living room window was open just wide enough to let in the smell of cut grass and the distant hum of life. Raymond sat cross-legged on the rug, fiddling with a worn wooden block shaped like a giraffe. Nearby, Elia sat in her little seafoam onesie, all chubby cheeks and untamed curls, babbling nonsense into the air like she was trying to teach the room her own secret language. Valor lay a few feet away, half awake, his eyes tracking every sound with the precision of a soldier and the softness of a soul reborn. That's when it happened. Elia rose. No warning, no grand gesture. Just a quiet, wobbly decision, as if her body had finally caught up with the fire in her eyes. She didn't cry out. She didn't even look around for permission. She simply stood, one tiny hand reaching for balance, and found it in Valor's fur. Raymond froze. His heart climbed into his throat, beating fast and loud like it wanted front-row seats. Elia tightened her grip in the thick fur near Valor's shoulder, and the dog, so alert, so powerful, did not move. He didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't even blink. He became stone beneath her fingers, solid, safe, a living railing for a girl who had known the unthinkable before she ever learned the word sky. She took one step, then another, the kind that looked more like stumbles borrowed from gravity. But they were steps nonetheless. Raymond's lips parted, but no words came out. Just a breath, just awe. Elia's little legs wobbled like reeds in the wind, but she kept going, holding on to Valor, trusting him in the way children do when their hearts are still whole and the world hasn't taught them doubt. Step, step, step. She made it 3 full feet before she lost her balance and tumbled softly into Valor's side. The dog didn't move. He absorbed her fall like a shoreline, absorbing waves, steady and unshaken. Elia giggled. That sound, that sharp, golden chime of innocence, it cracked something open inside Raymond. She sat there, nestled against Valor's ribcage, laughing and drooling and clapping her palms against his fur like she'd just discovered gravity and wasn't sure she believed in it. Raymond laughed too. He couldn't stop himself. Then he said it, softly, reverently, like a prayer whispered into the sacred space between heartbeat and silence. "You're a miracle with muddy footprints." Elia blinked up at him, wide eyes. No idea what the words meant, but somehow they landed anyway. He crawled over, scooped her into his arms, and held her against his chest, her warmth soaking into his shirt like sunlight. Valor got up then, slowly, stretching out his legs and yawning, letting his bones remember they were strong enough to support dreams. Raymond kissed the top of Elia's head and whispered, "You did it, baby girl." Then he looked at Valor. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, unspoken, but understood. "Thank you. Not just for the steps, but for standing still, for being her foundation, when the earth was still learning how to be kind." Later that night, he wrote it down, in the notebook he kept tucked under the nightstand, the one he only touched when words got too big to carry alone. June 3rd. She walked today. No announcement, no audience. Just her, barefoot, brave, and clinging to the one soul on this earth who knows how it feels to be rescued and still feel wild. Valor didn't move. He didn't blink. He became what she needed. A pillar, a friend, a story she'll tell one day without knowing how much it meant. Outside, the stars began to climb into the sky. Inside, a child dreamed in her crib. A dog lay curled at the foot of it, and a man, once shattered, once certain he had no more life to give, watched over them both with a heart stitched back together by tiny footsteps and a tail that never stopped watching the door. The badge gleamed under the sunlight, polished, framed in navy velvet, and etched with quiet reverence. It wasn't just a medal. It was a correction, a long overdue restoration of something that should have never been taken. Valor's name. The courtyard outside the LAPD K-9 Division headquarters was still that morning. Officers in dress uniforms lined the perimeter, a quiet hush falling as Raymond approached with Elia in his arms, and Valor trotting at his side, leash loose, posture proud. He wasn't wearing the old service harness today. Raymond had removed it months ago. But the memory of it lingered in the dog's gait. Valor walked not as a pet, but as a sentinel, a protector, a survivor. At the podium, the captain adjusted the microphone. "Today," she said, voice clear and steady, "we recognize not just bravery, but redemption. Not just service, but sacrifice that almost went unseen." She held up the plaque. K-9 Valor, retired with distinction, for heroism above and beyond duty and loyalty that transcended uniform or command. There was a silence. Then the captain added, "And we honor the file that should have never been closed in shame." She held up another document, weathered, reprinted, but intact. Shadow's original service file, stamped not with terminated, but with retired honorably. Gasps broke across the crowd. Some of the older handlers nodded, eyes misty. They remembered the rumors, the dog who disappeared, the one they were told turned feral. And now, here he was, gray at the edges, but sharper than ever, a chapter rewritten in full. They called Raymond forward. His steps were slow, almost reluctant, but his eyes never left Valor. At the small table beside the podium, the medal rested, a custom-forged medallion with a blue enamel ring around the words service, sacrifice, guardian. No pomp, no trumpet, just dignity. Raymond took the medal with both hands, the weight of it heavier than expected. Not in metal, but in meaning. He knelt. Valor, sensing the gravity, sat without command. Raymond reached out, his fingers trembling slightly, and gently placed the ribbon around the dog's thick neck. It slid into place, resting just beneath his chin. A gust of wind lifted the flag behind them. Cameras clicked. No one spoke. Raymond cleared his throat, looked down at the dog he once thought he'd never see again, and whispered, "You didn't need a medal to be a hero, but I think it's about damn time they knew." Valor licked his hand. Elia clapped softly in his arms, her small hands patting the air like she somehow knew this was important, even if she didn't yet know why. One of the officers in the back began to applaud, then another, and another, until the courtyard echoed with something more powerful than ceremony respect. Raymond stood there, tears welling behind his eyes but refusing to fall. He wasn't going to cry today. Not because he didn't feel it, but because this wasn't goodbye. It was something rarer. Justice. Not the kind found in courtrooms, but the kind carved through persistence, truth, and the unwavering gaze of a dog who never stopped showing up. Afterward, someone handed Raymond the reinstated file. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket like a sacred relic. He looked down at Valor again, medal still shining, tail sweeping slow contentment across the concrete. "You were always Shadow," he whispered. "But now they see who you've become." Valor. No longer a ghost in a broken system, no longer forgotten. Now finally a name the world honored, not erased. It was the kind of morning that carried memory, and the breeze soft, cool, a little golden around the edges. The new bench stood beneath an old elm in the quietest part of the park. Not flashy, just smooth cedar wood, warm to the touch, facing a playground where children laughed and chased each other in crooked circles. But this bench wasn't for watching games. It was for remembering why second chances mattered. The plaque was small, no bigger than a paperback book. Brushed brass, fastened cleanly in the center of the backrest. Raymond ran his hand over it once before kneeling beside Elia. "Want to hear what it says?" he asked gently. Elia, now a toddler full of bright mischief, nodded and clapped. Valor stood a few feet behind, head slightly cocked, ears relaxed. His gaze was steady, not on the plaque, but on the child. Raymond cleared his throat, voice a touch raw. "In honor of second chances, for Derek, Elia, and Valor." He paused. "Elia," he said softly, "that's your name right there, right next to Uncle Derek. And Valor, all the hearts that didn't quit, even when life tried to break them." The little girl smiled, then waddled over to the bench and tapped the metal plate with her tiny fingers, babbling something only she could understand. To her, it was just another place in the world with her name on it. But to Raymond, it was a promise, a place to sit, to grieve, to hope, to start again. And not just for them, because every week now, someone new came to that bench. A man in a VA jacket who stayed quiet. A young mom with tearful eyes and empty hands. A volunteer nurse who once held Elia the night she was brought in. And sometimes Selena. She never stayed long, but she always came with flowers, nothing extravagant. Just hand-picked wild daisies or sunflowers in a reused jar. She'd sit for a few minutes, place a hand on the wood, then look toward the playground, where Elia might be toddling near the sandbox under Raymond's watchful eye. Raymond never asked her why she came. He didn't need to. The grief between them had softened, no longer sharp, no longer unspoken. It had shape now, history, even grace. "Hey, Selena," he greeted gently once when she came near. She looked up, surprised but not afraid. "Hi. Want to sit?" She hesitated, then nodded. They sat side by side, not close, not far, just human. "She's growing fast," Selena murmured, watching Elia giggle as Valor rolled over onto his back, tongue out, legs flailing. Raymond smiled. Too fast sometimes. They didn't talk about courtrooms or guardianship or what had been signed away. They talked about bedtime stories, favorite foods, Elia's first words. She said dog before she said dad, Raymond admitted with a quiet chuckle. Selena laughed through her nose. Honestly, that tracks. The wind picked up. A few leaves dropped, twirling. A child nearby called out in delight. Raymond glanced down at the plaque again. Second chances. He turned to her. "You're always welcome here. You know that, right?" Selena nodded slowly. Her eyes shimmered, not with guilt, not even with sadness, but something harder to name. Something like peace. "She's lucky," she whispered, "to have you. Both of you." Raymond looked over to where Valor stood, tail wagging gently, watching Elia with the kind of silent protection that no medal could capture. "No," he said. "We're the lucky ones." Later, after everyone had gone and the sun had begun to dip low behind the trees, Raymond sat alone on the bench with Elia asleep in his lap. Valor lay at his feet, his breathing deep and slow. Raymond looked out at the world beyond the plaque, the lives that passed, the memories that a bench could carry, the names etched in brass and in bone, the pain that didn't vanish, but evolved. And he whispered, not to anyone in particular, "This isn't the end, Derek. It's the beginning." Then he kissed Elia's hair, leaned back into the wood, and let the silence hold them all. The world outside was sleeping under snow. A final winter evening had wrapped the house in stillness, branches lined in frost, the hush of wind threading through the pines, and a soft amber glow flickering from behind the old glass windows. Inside, firelight danced across the wooden walls. It crackled gently, like it knew to keep quiet. Raymond sat in the worn armchair by the hearth, the one with stuffing that poked out a little at the arms, and a patch Selina had stitched long ago. It had once belonged to his father, then to Derek. Now it was his turn. Elia lay curled against his chest, her small breath warm against his collarbone. One hand was fisted into the collar of his flannel shirt, the other clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. Her curls were damp with sleep, lashes fluttering now and then, lips parted in a peaceful dream world of her own. Raymond hadn't moved for nearly an hour, not because he was too tired, but because he didn't want to break it. This moment, the kind you wish you could bottle up and return to when the noise starts again. His hand rested gently along her back, rising and falling with each breath. And though his body ached in the way age makes certain knees stiff, back sore, neck creaking, his heart had never been quieter, closer, whole. Beside them, on the floor near the hearth, Valor lay curled like a living shadow. His head was resting on crossed paws, ears relaxed, breathing slow. Every so often, his tail thumped against the wood softly, like a heartbeat keeping time with the fire. Raymond glanced down at him and smiled. "You're still on duty, aren't you?" he whispered. The dog didn't stir, just flicked one ear. Raymond reached out, brushing his fingers along the thick fur at Valor's shoulder, the heat from his body, the pulse beneath. It grounded him, not just to the floor, but to everything they'd lived through. There were framed photos above the mantel now, one of Derek in uniform, another of Selina and Elia the day of the court signing, both of them laughing, mid-blink, and beside them, a picture of Valor receiving his honorary medal, tongue lolling, eyes gleaming with that signature mix of pride and unbothered loyalty. Raymond looked at those photos often, but tonight he didn't need them, because everything that mattered was already here in this room. A child who'd taught him to open again, a dog who never stopped believing in him, and a silence that didn't ache anymore, only soothed. The fire popped once, throwing sparks against the screen. Outside, the wind picked up and howled against the eaves, but it couldn't get in, not here. Elia stirred slightly and let out a small sigh, nestling deeper into him. Raymond whispered into her hair, "It's okay, baby girl. I've got you." He didn't mean just tonight. He meant always. There was no war left to fight, no ghosts he hadn't already met in the dark. And somehow, in all the years he thought he'd lost everything, what he needed most had been waiting in the shadows. Second chances. They came without warning, without promises, without guarantees. But sometimes on a winter night, with a dog by your feet and a child in your arms, they came wrapped in firelight. And when they did, you held on. You stayed still. You let yourself believe. The fire had dwindled to embers now. Ash settled like soft snow in the grate, and the glow pulsed low and slow like the last heartbeat of a long day. In that hush, Raymond sat still, One arm curled protectively around the small, sleeping body on his chest. Elia had not stirred. Outside, dawn was beginning its slow ascent, brushing pale light against the edges of the windowpane. Inside, though, it still felt like night, like a sacred moment untouched by time, held together by breath and memory. Raymond leaned his head back against the chair and closed his eyes. And let it come, all of it. The alley behind St. Joseph's, where he once curled up with nothing but a coat and a promise he couldn't keep. The fire escape stairs, where he sat for hours after Derek's funeral, wondering if the world would ever feel soft again. The food lines, the veterans' shelter, the ache in his bones that was more than physical, the years of silence, the nights with no one calling his name, and then the barking. The sound of tiny footsteps. The first time Elia fell asleep with her hand in his beard. The smell of oatmeal and applesauce. The laughter. The letters. The feeling of being needed again. It came like a tide, warm and steady, and he let it wash over him. He looked down at Elia, her cheek pressed against his shirt, mouth slack with sleep, a smear of drool just above the corner of her lip. Beautiful, unapologetically hers. A second chance not just for her, but for him. "She doesn't even know what she saved," he murmured, his voice gravel soft. "But maybe that's how it's supposed to be." A quiet rustle came from near the hearth. Valor lifted his head. The dog blinked slowly, ears twitching, eyes steady meeting Raymond's without hesitation. There was no bark, no whine, just that calm, sentient stillness that spoke louder than any words. Raymond looked back at him and smiled through the lump in his throat. "We did good, partner." He said it not like a declaration, but a confession. A final truth. Unburdened. The old dog didn't wag his tail. He didn't move. But he held the gaze a second longer than usual, and then let out a soft, heavy exhale, as if saying, "I know." Raymond reached out and brushed his fingers over Valor's head. The fur was coarse, silvering near the muzzle. Time was catching up, but for now, they had this. They had now. The house was no longer just a shelter. It had become a home. Not because of the walls or the donated furniture or even the heat from the fireplace, but because of what it had survived. What they had survived. A fallen soldier, a stray dog, a child without a name. Now, they were a family. Raymond's voice cracked as he whispered, "I carried so much grief, boy. I didn't think there was room left for love." His hand tightened slightly on Elia's back. "But you taught me it can fit." It has to fit. Outside, the sun rose a little higher, painting gold over the frost. The world didn't know what had happened in this little house overnight. Didn't know the battles fought, the tears shed, the quiet triumphs whispered between breaths. But Raymond knew. So did Valor. And so, in the stillness of a morning born from firelight and second chances, they sat. One man, one dog, one child, full circle. The screen fades to black. A long pause. No music yet, just silence. The kind that settles after a story finishes telling itself, like dust floating in golden afternoon light. Then, in a slow, quiet typewriter font, a line appears on the screen. "Family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up when no one else does." And with it, a series of soft, flickering images returns one by one. A scarred dog curled at the foot of a crib. A man folding a baby blanket with military precision, tiny hands grabbing gray fur for balance. Laughter echoing off park benches, etched with names not forgotten but redefined. A letter in a box, sealed with a promise only the heart can read. These aren't grand moments. They're small, earned, stitched from silence, rebuilt from loss. A second line fades in beneath the first, dedicated to the ones who choose to love. There's no spotlight on them. No medals for midnight feedings, no news cameras for sitting beside someone in their worst hour. But they show up anyway. The ones who take in a baby that isn't theirs and call her daughter. The ones who offer a leash, a bed, a second chance to a dog deemed unfit to serve. The ones who make dinner from donated cans but serve it like a feast. The ones who listen without fixing, hold without judging, stay even when it hurts. The screen slowly begins to glow with morning light. Not a sunrise, but the soft amber haze that signals a life once broken, now mended. And in that light, the final image appears. Raymond asleep in his chair, Elia curled on his chest, Valor sprawled nearby like a worn-out sentinel. A quiet family. No bloodlines, just lifelines. The music comes in now, gentle piano, slow strings, not meant to move you to tears, but to hold the ones already there, because the ending doesn't scream. It exhales, softly, like a man who no longer fears tomorrow, like a child who knows she is safe, like a dog who finally found his home. This story was never just about a man, a child, or a dog. It was about the quiet, powerful love that heals wounds we don't always see. It reminded us that family isn't measured in DNA, but in devotion. That second chances aren't just possible. They're sometimes more beautiful than first ones. Through Raymond's journey and Valor's unwavering loyalty, we're reminded of the silent strength animals bring into our lives, especially dogs like German Shepherds, noble, intuitive, brave. They don't ask for much, just a place beside us. And in return, they give everything. Let this story speak to those who've felt broken, those who've had to start over, and those who've ever wondered if they were enough. Let it honor those who step forward when no one else does. Most of all, let it be a tribute to the everyday acts of courage. Adopting an old dog, cradling a child through the night, or whispering, "We did good," when no one is watching. Because in the end, the world doesn't change in loud declarations. It changes quietly, in love chosen, in loyalty proven, and in hearts that still believe in redemption.